The careful wind was never meant to find anything interesting. Subcommander Verath of the Vreth Defense Collective had been running patrol routes along the contested fringe for 11 years. The fringe was a wide band of empty space between Vreth territory and the outer spiral arm, where stars thinned out and the distances between them grew long and cold. Nothing important lived out there. A few dust cloud organisms, some primitive creatures on frozen moons. The fringe existed to be watched, not explored, and watching it was exactly the kind of assignment that got handed to officers who were reliable enough to keep but not impressive enough to promote. Verath had made peace with that. So when Science Officer Dren's console chirped at 3:40 ship time, Verath assumed it was another false reading. A comet, a gas cloud, a sensor glitch caused by the ancient calibration system he had requested a replacement for 6 times and been denied 6 times. The kind of thing that filled patrol logs with boring entries and nobody ever read. Sub-Commander, Dren's voice was careful, too careful, the kind of careful that meant a person was deciding how to deliver news before they delivered it. You should come look at this. Verath came and looked. On the long-range display, a vessel was moving through the outer fringe at moderate speed. It was large. Not the largest ship Verath had ever seen, but large in the way a clenched fist was large, compact, dense, built with a kind of blunt purpose that had no interest in looking graceful. Where Vreth ships were long and tapered, designed to cut through space like thrown spears, this vessel was broad, flat, squared off at the bow in a way that should have looked clumsy, but instead looked like something that had decided a long time ago that aesthetics were not worth worrying about. Registry, Verath asked. Nothing in our database. Dren pulled up the enhanced visual. The ship's hull was dark, not painted dark, but the deep, faded dark of something that had spent a very long time moving through the black between stars. Along its port side, large letters had been marked in a script Verath did not recognize. He had their translation unit run the characters through its database. ISV, Meridian's Wrath. ISV, Dren said. That prefix matches human vessel designation formats, inter-system vessel. Verath looked at the ship. He had never seen a human vessel. Nobody in the Vreth Defense Fleet had seen one in person. Humans existed somewhere deeper in the inner spiral arm, past several other territories, tucked into a cluster of yellow stars that the Vreth had no particular reason to visit. They traded with the Keth. They had some contact with the Sorathi. In the general assessment of Vreth intelligence, they were a minor species, moderate technology, no significant military reach, nothing to worry about. That assessment was 60 years old. Run the full scan, Verath said. Dren initiated the deep penetration scan protocol. It would take approximately 4 minutes to compile a complete profile. Hull composition, weapon systems, power signature, life signs. 4 minutes of standing in silence on a patrol frigate at the edge of nowhere, watching a dark ship move through the dark, waiting. The first results came in at the 2-minute mark. Dren went still. He stood with his back to Verath, looking at his console, and the back of his neck went pale in the way that Vreth's skin went pale when the body's blood was busy doing other things, flowing to the organs that processed threat, pulling back from the extremities. Dren. The hull. Dren's voice had become flat, the flatness of a person whose capacity for appropriate reactions had run out and was now simply reading information aloud. Sub-Commander, I am going to show you the hull composition breakdown. I have checked it 3 times. The breakdown appeared on the main display. The Meridian's Wrath had 5 distinct hull layers. 5. Verath read the breakdown twice, very carefully, because he wanted to make sure he understood what he was looking at. The outermost layer was an ablative coating, a material designed to absorb energy by burning away slowly, taking the heat of a weapon strike with it as it went. Beneath that was a composite weave of 2 materials that had opposing thermal properties, which should have meant they could not be used together, but had somehow been combined in a way that dispersed heat sideways rather than inward. Below that was a reactive mesh engineered to flex and compress under kinetic impact instead of fracturing. Then came solid, reinforced plating. Then the structural hull itself. Vreth warships used 3 layers. Efficient Vreth warships used 2. That is not how ships are built, Vareth said. No, Dren agreed. It is not efficient. It is the least efficient hull design I have ever seen in terms of material cost. But Sub-Commander, he pulled up a damage tolerance projection. My model estimates that this hull can absorb sustained fire from our primary emitter banks for approximately 47 seconds before the outermost layer is fully destroyed. He paused. And then there are still 4 more layers. Varath looked at the ship on the screen. It moved at its steady pace. It did not appear to know it was being scanned. The weapons report came in next. Dren read it aloud, which was not standard procedure. Vareth did not stop him. He suspected Dren needed to hear the words himself to believe them. Primary weapon systems, 4 distinct types identified. Dren's voice was steady but only by effort. First, long-range directed energy arrays, 1 dorsal, 1 ventral. Output rating is consistent with a heavy cruiser classification. This ship is the tonnage of a destroyer. A pause. Second, mid-range kinetic lance systems, 6 emplacements on port and starboard facing. Kinetic lances of this output rating are typically mounted on dreadnoughts. Another pause longer. Third, a missile battery, 42 launch tubes. 42. Dren stopped briefly. Fourth, close-range point defense systems, 17 emplacements firing solid projectiles at high velocity, primitive delivery method, but the rate of fire, he looked up from the console. Sub-Commander, at maximum output, these 17 emplacements can put approximately 9,000 individual solid projectiles per second into a close-range target zone. The bridge was very quiet. 9,000, Vareth said. Per second, yes. Varath looked at the ship on the display. It moved the same way it had been moving since it appeared on the screen. Steady, unhurried, going somewhere. Power systems, he said. 8 cores. Dren said this the way someone said a number that they had added up wrong 3 times and kept getting the same wrong answer. 8 separate power generation cores. I have identified the primary drive core, which is sufficient to operate this vessel at full combat capacity. The remaining 7 appear to be backup systems. He paused. If you destroy the primary core and 6 of the backups, the 8th core alone is still sufficient to power the main weapon arrays. Vareth sat down. He had not decided to sit. His legs made the decision on their own and his body followed. And the crew, he said. Dren pulled up the life sign data. This was the part Vareth would think later, where a sensible officer would have closed the scan, turned the careful wind around, and filed a report from a comfortable distance. This was the decision point. Vareth had stood at it and not known it was a decision point until he was already past it. 847 life signs, Dren said. A vessel of this class, in standard fleet doctrine, would be crewed by between 90 and 140 personnel. The humans are running approximately 6 times the standard complement. Why? I don't know. Dren was quiet for a moment. But the biological data is what I want you to see. Sub-Commander, these readings in any species in our database would indicate severe physical distress. Their core body temperature runs approximately 3 degrees above the point where a Vreth body would begin showing organ stress. Their circulatory pressure is elevated beyond safe parameters for most known biology. Cortisol levels that, in a Vreth officer, would indicate active combat response. He scrolled through the data and the neurological patterns. I have been looking at these for the last 90 seconds and I can only describe them as... He stopped. Describe them, Vareth said. Anticipatory. Dren said the word slowly. All 847 crew members on that ship register neurological activity consistent with a state of readiness. Not alarm, not stress, readiness. as if they are waiting for something to happen and they find the waiting comfortable. Verath looked at the Meridian's wrath on the display. It was still moving, steady pace. A destination and no interest in hurrying. They know we're scanning them, Verath said. Almost certainly. Their sensor capability is considerably beyond what our profile suggested. They would have detected our active scan within the first 40 seconds. They had known for 6 minutes. They had done nothing. 847 beings, running hot, neurologically at ease with the prospect of violence, packed into a ship built like an armored fist, just going wherever they were going. Under an active scan, doing nothing. Verath opened a communication channel. He sat in the static of an open line and waited. On the display, the Meridian's wrath continued at its pace. 43 seconds passed. Then a voice came through, female, unhurried, with a slight roughness to it that might have been accent or might have been what happened after years of breathing recycled ship air. This is Captain Elena Marsh of the ISV Meridian's Wrath. A brief pause. You've been in our scan shadow for a while, which means you've been watching us for a while. You want to say something or just keep starring. Verath had been in the Vreth Defense Fleet for 31 years. He had hailed hundreds of vessels. He had never been addressed quite like that. He identified himself. Subcommander Verath, Vreth Defense Collective Patrol Division. He explained that the contested fringe was under Vreth Observation Protocol, that any vessel transiting this region was required to identify itself, state its destination and purpose, and wait for formal clearance. A brief silence from the other end. We identified ourselves, Marsh said. Meridian's Wrath ISV Registry out of Earth. Destination is the Keth Trade Hub at Waypoint 11. Purpose is transit. We're cutting through your observation zone because it is 3 days shorter than going around. Another pause shorter. Do you need anything else or can we get moving? Verath blinked. Captain, formal clearance requires. A procedure for ships that file advanced transit requests, which we didn't because we didn't know your observation zone extended this far out. We'll update our charts. Her voice was not rude. It was the voice of a person who had decided to be patient and was executing that decision with discipline. Is there a security concern, Subcommander? Something you need to flag? Verath looked at Dren. Dren looked back at him with the expression of a man who wanted very much to be somewhere else. We will need to conduct a formal inspection, Verath said. The silence this time lasted longer. No, Marsh said. Just that, one word. No qualifier, no apology, no diplomatic softening attached to it. Captain, I must advise you that refusal to comply with Vreth Observation Protocol in a contested zone. Subcommander, her voice stayed level. I've been flying this ship for 11 years. Nobody boards my ship without my permission, not a formal request, not a clearance demand. A very slight pause, and not a patrol frigate that's been sitting in our scan shadow for 6 minutes thinking I don't know exactly what it's been reading. She had known, the entire time. She had watched them scan her ship and said nothing and waited for them to say something first. You've got what you need, Marsh said. You know what we're carrying, what we're running, and where we're going. That is more than most people get. We are going to continue on course. You have a good shift, Subcommander. The channel closed. Verath sat in the silence of his bridge. Outside on the display, the Meridian's Wrath continued at its pace. Not faster, not slower. It did not look back. He thought about the hull, 5 layers. He thought about the weapons, 9,000 projectiles per second. He thought about 847 beings running 3 degrees hotter than anything in the database, neurologically comfortable in their readiness, riding inside a machine built for the specific purpose of surviving tremendous amounts of damage and continuing to fight. He thought about a voice that had hung up on a Vreth officer in the contested fringe, and hadn't sounded worried about it at all. Dren, he said. Yes, Subcommander. Get me a direct line to Fleet Command, highest priority classification. He looked at the ship on the screen. And pull everything we have on the human species, every report, every trade deposition, every second-hand account, every line. Dren moved to comply. But as he did, one file pulled up automatically in the preliminary search. A Keth diplomatic dispatch, 6 years old, flagged and never acted on. A single line from a Keth trade envoy's personal notes after a meeting with human representatives. When they smile, it is difficult to remember that they have been at war with something somewhere for as long as any record of them exists. The Meridian's wrath moved away into the deep dark of the fringe. Sub-Commander Varath began composing the most important report of his career. He stared at the blank page for a long time before he wrote the first word. He was not sure there were words adequate to what he had just seen. He started writing anyway. The report from Sub-Commander Varath reached Fleet Command in 6 hours. It sat in the priority queue for 14 minutes before High Admiral Soren opened it. She read through it once quickly, the way an experienced officer read something to get the shape of it. Then she read it again, slowly, the way an experienced officer read something they did not fully believe. Then she called her intelligence division. "Get me Analyst Thess," she said, "and whoever is responsible for our current assessment file on human military capacity." She paused, "and make sure the file is recent, within the last decade." The file was not recent. The most current comprehensive assessment of human military capacity in the Vreth intelligence database was 43 years old. It had been compiled from second-hand reports and Keth trade records by an analyst whose name Soren did not recognize, which meant the analyst was either dead or had moved on to other work. The section on human warship design was 3 paragraphs long. It described human vessels as functional in design, but unremarkable in both offense and defensive capacity, consistent with a species in early-stage interstellar development. High Admiral Soren read those 3 paragraphs and then set the file down very carefully on her desk. She set it down carefully because she wanted to throw it, and throwing it would not help anything. Analyst Thess arrived at Fleet Command within the hour. Thess was thin, older, with the look of someone who had spent the majority of her career in archive rooms rather than briefing halls. She moved without hurry and spoke without decoration, which were qualities Soren generally liked in analysts. Thess had been studying human civilizations as her primary specialty for 22 years. In the intelligence division, this was considered an eccentric choice. Humans were regarded as too distant and too marginal to warrant that level of sustained attention. Thess had never tried to argue the point. She had simply kept working. She looked at the scan data from Varath's report for 11 minutes without saying anything. Soren waited. "Well," Thess said finally. "Well," Soren prompted. "Well, this is more or less what I would have expected." Thess set the data slate down. "The hull design is consistent with the human approach, which I have been documenting in assessments that I am going to guess nobody read." She pulled up a comparison image from her own files, a human vessel photographed by a Keth trading contact 30 years ago. 30 years ago, human warships used 3 hull layers, now 5. They iterate their design continuously. Every generation of vessel improves on the last. They do not develop a design and consider it finished. What about the weapons loadout? Also consistent. Thess spoke in the measured tone of a person delivering a diagnosis they had predicted but had not enjoyed being right about. "Admiral, human weapon design is built around a core principle that is different from ours. We design weapons to destroy a target as efficiently as possible. Destroy fast, move on. Human doctrine does not assume efficient destruction. Human doctrine assumes the enemy will absorb significant fire and continue. So human weapon systems are designed for sustained, high-volume output against targets that are still moving and still fighting." Soren looked at the scanned data on her screen. Why would they assume that? Thess was quiet for a moment. Because that is what they have always fought. Admiral, human military history, and I want to be precise here because this point matters. Human military history does not begin at a point we can identify and trace forward. It has no beginning we can locate. The oldest human records we can access through Keth intermediaries describe organized, coordinated warfare, not primitive conflict. Organized warfare with strategy, with command structures, with the kind of sustained tactical planning that requires communication and hierarchy. She paused. Those records are very old, before written language, before cities. The humans were conducting organized warfare before they had a word to write down for it. The room was still. They have been at war, Soren said slowly. Continuously, Thess said, not always with other species, mostly with each other throughout most of their history, with the other species on their homeworld, with the environment itself in certain periods. The pattern never stopped. It evolved. It changed shape, but it never stopped. She folded her hands on the table. Their biology reflects this. Their technology reflects this. Their psychology reflects this. Everything about them has been shaped by the ongoing fact of violent conflict, the way a river is shaped by water, over a very long time, in a way that becomes the form itself. Soren turned to the biological data, these readings, the crew life signs. Thess sat down. Soren noted this. Analysts stood through briefings as a matter of professional habit. Thess sitting meant she intended to speak for a while. When most species first encounter human biological data, Thess said, they read it as distress. Elevated temperature, elevated circulatory pressure, high cortisol output, neurological activity that resembles a fear or threat response. They assume they are seeing a species that is chronically unwell or under constant stress. She looked at Soren. This is the wrong interpretation. Humans are not in distress. That is simply their baseline. Their body runs hot because it needs to run hot. Their circulatory system runs at high pressure because it has to move fast. Their cortisol output is what it is because their species spent a very long time in environments where a slower chemical response meant being dead before you finished having it. She pulled up a Vreth body diagram next to a human one. The Vreth body has one heart, one liver, 2 kidneys. If you destroy one, the body compensates but is compromised. One primary brain structure. If any of these systems fail critically, the organism fails. She moved her hand to the human diagram. The human body has a 4-chambered heart with redundant function, a liver with significant reserve capacity, 2 kidneys where the loss of one barely affects long-term function, and a nervous system with multiple redundant pathways. More relevantly, when a human body is under extreme physical stress, it produces a chemical cascade that actively suppresses pain signaling and redirects blood flow to critical motor systems. She met Soren's eyes. A human who has been badly injured does not stop functioning. Their body chemistry is designed to keep them upright and operational long enough to finish whatever they were doing. The pain comes later, when the body decides the emergency is over. Soren was quiet for a long moment. They keep fighting, she said, until the damage is physically incompatible with continued function. Yes. Thess's voice was level. There is documentation from Keth observers of human soldiers continuing coordinated combat action with injuries that would immediately incapacitate any species in this database, not due to exceptional courage or training, due to biology. Their bodies are built to do it. Soren looked at the scan data. At the 847 life signs, all running hot, all neurologically at ease with the anticipation of a fight. That neurological readiness Dren identified, she said. That anticipatory state. Yes, Thess nodded. Humans are not relaxed. They are alert. There is a difference. A Vreth officer who is alert is operating above their baseline. It is a temporary state costly to sustain. For a human crew on a vessel in contested space, that state of alertness appears to be entirely comfortable, normal. They maintain it without apparent cost. She paused. Admiral, I think what Dren was reading in those neurological patterns was not anxiety. I think it was readiness that had become so habitual it no longer felt different from rest. Soren stood and walked to her window. Below, Fleet Command's central courtyard was quiet in the early morning light, personnel moving between buildings, ships in the dock bays visible in the distance. The captain, Soren said, "Marsh." She refused boarding, she just said no. "Yes." She didn't seem concerned. "No." Thess was quiet for a moment. "Admiral, I want to address this directly. The assumption behind our inspection request was that the human captain would weigh the situation, one human vessel against a Vreth patrol frigate, and conclude that compliance was the safer choice." She paused. "I do not think Captain Marsh made that calculation. I think she looked at the patrol frigate and made a different calculation entirely. She assessed what the asterisk careful wind could do to her, and what her ship could do to the asterisk careful wind asterisk. And the outcome of that math was so clear that the question of compliance or noncompliance was not a difficult one. So she said no, because saying yes to something that was not a genuine threat would have been pointless." Soren turned back from the window. "She wasn't afraid of us." "I don't think she had time to be," Thess said simply. "The math was faster than the fear." On the Meridian's Wrath, dinner was being served. It was a Tuesday by ship calendar. Cook de Lacroix had made emergency chili, which was a dense, heavily spiced batch cooked in large quantity from dry stores, and the crew ate it with the resignation of people who had eaten emergency chili many times before and had reached the point of finding it almost acceptable. Lieutenant Commander Dario Torres was in the mess hall with his bowl and a data pad when Ensign Park sat across from him. Park was 23, 6 months out of the academy, still in the phase of her career where things surprised her. Torres could remember that phase. It seemed a long time ago. "We had a contact this morning," she said. "It was not a question. The general alert had gone to every station." "Vreth patrol frigate," Torres said. He ate a spoonful of chili. "Sub-commander rank. They ran a full scan on us. We scanned back. The captain talked to them and that was the end of it." "They scanned us. They ran a full deep scan." 6 minutes roughly," Torres shrugged. "They read everything." Park looked unsettled. "Doesn't that bother you?" Torres thought about it genuinely. The way he tried to do when junior crew asked him questions that deserved real answers instead of reassurance. "Not particularly," he said. "We read everything too. Light patrol frigate, 2 emitter banks, moderate shielding. We could have ended that conversation differently if we'd needed to. We didn't need to," he ate. "So we didn't." Park was quiet for a moment. She got quiet when she was working something through, which Torres liked. Better than the ones who talked through everything out loud and confused action with thought. "The captain said no to the boarding," Park said. "Just no, and they accepted that." "They didn't have much choice." Torres set down his spoon. "Ensign, the Vreth frigate crew knows what their ship can do to us. They know what we can do to their ship. That math has one answer. A good commander accepts the answer and doesn't spend crew to prove a point." He picked up his data pad. "Captain Marsh has been navigating contested zones for 11 years. She knows how to say no in a way that doesn't become a war." Park nodded slowly. "Then, do you think they'll report us?" Torres looked at her. "They've already reported us," he said. "There is a Vreth admiral somewhere reading a file right now and having a very poor evening." He smiled slightly, not unkindly. "That's fine. Let them read. If they come back with a different attitude and more ships, we'll handle it, either way." He went back to his data pad. "Finish your chili. Long burn to waypoint 11. Park finished her chili. On the bridge, Captain Alina Marsh was at the wide forward viewport with her coffee. Real coffee, grown in the ship's small hydroponic bay. Old habit. The mug was older than the habit, handle repaired twice, finish worn down to bare ceramic in the grip spot. She liked old things that kept working. She thought about the Vreth officer's voice. Professional, careful, doing the job the way the job was designed to be done, by a system that had not yet had to account for an ISV vessel in its paperwork. She had no particular hostility towards Subcommander Verath. He had been doing what patrol officers did. She thought about what his face would look like if he had facial expressions she could read. When he saw what the full scan told him, she had always thought it was useful for new encounters to begin with accurate information. It saved the kind of misunderstanding that got people killed. Lieutenant Osai appeared beside her. "Captain, we're picking up an increase in Vreth encrypted communications traffic. High-priority signals, moving between the fringe zone and a location the navigation system estimates as a fleet command hub." "When did it start?" "Approximately 40 minutes after our encounter with the careful wind." Marsh nodded. "Log the traffic frequency. If it spikes, note the timestamp." "Yes, sir." A pause. "Should we adjust course?" Marsh looked at the stars. "No," she said. "Waypoint 11, 3 days by this route." She drank her coffee. "We stay on course." Osai returned to his station. At the weapons console, Sergeant Akafer was running his nightly manual calibration on the point defense systems, all 17 emplacements. He did this every night regardless of what the automated diagnostics said, because automated diagnostics told you what the system thought it was doing, and manual calibration told you what the system was actually doing, and those two things were not always the same. "All green, Captain," Akafer said without looking up. "Good," Marsh said. She sat in her chair and watched the stars and thought about what the next few days might bring, and the shape of that thinking was not anxiety. It was the same thing it always was, a clear-eyed look at the road ahead, and a quiet inventory of everything she had available to handle whatever was on it. The Meridian's wrath moved through the fringe, and somewhere behind it, in a priority-coded signal burning fast across the dark, a report was making its way to a desk where a Vreth admiral was about to have a very long night. High Admiral Soren made her decision at 200 ship time, after reading Thess's full brief twice and the scanned data from the careful wind asterisk 3 times. She would send an intercept fleet. Not because she wanted a battle. Soren had been in command long enough to know that battles were easy to start and expensive to finish, and she had no desire to find out what finishing a battle with a human warship looked like in practice. She sent the intercept fleet because she needed the human vessel stopped before it reached Waypoint 11, which was a Keth hub with 17 species in residence. And she did not want the Keth, or the Sorathi, or anyone else to see a human warship transit freely through a zone the Vreth had spent 30 years establishing as their observed territory. It was a matter of standing, of signal. She told herself that. She assigned Fleet Commander Aviath to lead the intercept. Aviath had 28 years of service, a record of successful diplomatic resolutions in 3 contested engagements, and the kind of temperament that came across as reasonable on communication channels. Soren wanted this resolved through words, not weapons. She made that very clear in the orders. She also assigned 3 warships to accompany the diplomatic vessel ***, because she was not naive, and because Thess's briefing had not left her feeling generous about unescorted options. The intercept fleet departed within 4 hours. Fleet Commander Aviath had read the scan data during the transit. She had read Thess's assessment. She had read the communication log from Verath's encounter, especially the 43-second pause before Marsh responded, and the one word that followed the boarding request. No. Aviath was experienced enough to respect what that one word represented. It was not defiance for its own sake. It was a person who had done the math, gotten a clear answer, and declined to pretend the math said something different. She arrived at the Meridian's Wrath's calculated position 28 hours after departure, well ahead of the human vessel's arrival at Waypoint 11. Her 3 warships came out of faster-than-light transit in a prearranged formation, 1 ship ahead across the Meridian's path, 1 on the port flank, 1 on the starboard. The asterisk comm words held position 20,000 kilometers behind them. It was a professional intercept formation, triangulated weapons coverage, multiple angles of engagement. She had briefed every crew member on the scan data because she wanted her people to know what they were facing. She wanted no one on her ships to be operating under a comfortable set of wrong assumptions. She opened a channel. ISV vessel Meridian's Wrath. This is Fleet Commander Aviath of the Vreth Defense Collective, commanding from the warship Asterisk First Voice of the Deep Asterisk. You are operating in a zone under formal Vreth observation protocol. You are instructed to reduce speed and come to a full stop, accept escort to Vreth Station 7, and permit a complete boarding inspection under Collective Security Protocol 1-4. She paused. You have 1 standard hour to comply. I am prepared to discuss the terms of your transit in that time. I encourage you to respond. She closed the transmission and looked at her tactical officer. Time to their current position. 43 minutes at their present speed, Commander. Aviath nodded. She looked at the main display at the shape of the human ship moving toward them from the dark. Same profile as the scan data. Same flat, dense, ugly silhouette. Same steady pace. Keep scanning, she said. I want continuous life sign and power system monitoring. Any change at all, I want to know immediately. The scanning team confirmed. The screen updated. 847 life signs. All running at the same elevated baseline. All showing the same anticipatory neurological pattern that Dren had struggled to describe in his report. Aviath had a word for it now, from Thess's briefing. The word was asterisk readiness asterisk. 847 people who found readiness so comfortable it had become their resting state. Any change in weapons power? Aviath asked. No increase in weapon charge, Commander, but the scan operator paused. All weapon systems were already at warm standby level. They appear to have been at warm standby since before our arrival. Aviath was quiet for a moment. They had been at warm standby before the intercept fleet arrived. They had not powered up in response to 4 Vreth ships. They had simply been at warm standby the way other crews were at normal rest. Keep watching, she said. On the Meridian's Wrath, the general quarters tone sounded at 9:14. The tone was a single clear note, not a klaxon. Captain Marsh had changed the alarm 8 years ago because she had found that her crew responded better to a call for attention than a call for panic. Panic was noise. Attention was useful. 847 people went to their stations without running. In the engine room, Chief Engineer Vasquez brought cores 2 through 8 to warm standby and started pre-running the restart sequences on the damage control systems. She did not need to be told why. She had been doing this long enough to know what 4 ships in a triangulated formation meant. In the medical bay, Dr. Akari set up 3 surgical stations and told his 2 trauma nurses to eat something. Not because he thought they had time for a full meal. Because they needed something in their bodies, and he had been in this situation before, and he knew what came next usually came fast. In the mess hall, which was no longer serving breakfast because the meal period had ended but which Cook Delacroix had not yet secured for cleaning, Delacroix looked at the 4 ships on the secondary display screen mounted near the galley door. He pulled out the bread. He started making sandwiches. Roast protein from last night's store, pressed flat between dense bread, easy to hold in one hand. The kind of food you could eat standing up between tasks. He made enough for the bridge crew plus a few extra. You made food when you could. You ate it when you could. You did not know which moment was going to be the last comfortable moment for a while, so you used them while you had them. On the bridge, Lieutenant Commander Torres was running the numbers on the 4 Vreth ships. 3 warships, he said. 2 match the medium destroyer class from the database profile, older design but well-maintained, based on the power signature. The 3rd is a heavier escort type, bigger emitters, heavier shielding, and the fourth back 20,000 kilometers reads as a diplomatic vessel. Light armament, civilian-grade shielding. Ratings, Marsh asked. The two destroyers together probably put out weapons fire comparable to our primary arrays. The escort is heavier, its emitters outrange ours slightly, and its shielding is layered. Torres paused, running calculations. Combined, all three warships working together outgun us by somewhere between 25 and 35%, depending on their targeting coordination. Their shielding type. Standard Vreth 3-layer reactive configuration. Torres looked at her. Our kinetic lances are specifically designed for reactive shielding. They go through 3-layer reactive like it is not there. Marsh nodded slowly. Noted. She looked at the formation on the screen. They're good. That's a proper intercept formation. Aviath knows what she's doing. Yes, sir. Marsh was quiet for a moment. She looked at the triangulated spread of the three warships, at the gap in the formation that would require maneuvering to exploit, at the way the escort ship was positioned to cover both destroyers if one of them needed support. She looked at the diplomatic vessel held back at a safe remove. A good formation, a commander who was hopping for words and preparing for the alternative. She could respect that. Aviath's voice played on repeat from the speaker. 1 standard hour to comply. Marsh let it run. She listened to the tone of it, firm but not aggressive, controlled. The voice of a person who was doing a job and genuinely preferred the clean resolution at the end of it. Cook Delacroix appeared in the bridge doorway with a tray. He set it on the side console without a word and left. Torres took a sandwich immediately. Marsh took one eventually. Ensign Park looked at hers for a moment and then picked it up and ate it, because if the senior officers were eating, eating was the right thing to do. At the 40-minute mark, Akaffer's voice came from the weapons station. All 17-point defense emplacements confirm green. Missile battery loaded, all 42 tubes. Primary arrays at warm standby. Kinetic lances at warm standby. Thank you, Sergeant. Vasquez's voice from the engine room, over the internal line. All 8 cores warm and responsive. I can give you full power to any system within 8 seconds of your order, Captain. Thank you, Chief. The hour countdown ticked downward on the main screen. Marsh watched it with the same expression she watched most things, attentive, considering, making no move toward any conclusion before she had thought it through. At the 58-minute mark, she set down her half-eaten sandwich, wiped her hands, and opened the channel to Fleet Commander Aviath. Fleet Commander Aviath, she said, I've received your message and I want to respond directly. She kept her voice level and clear. We decline your request to stop and accept inspection. I want to explain why briefly, and then I want to tell you what I think happens next if you decide to proceed anyway. She paused to let Aviath acknowledge the channel was open. We are in transit. We have committed no hostile act. We are carrying a commercial goods manifest for Waypoint 11. You are welcome to verify this by long-range sensor scan of our cargo hold, and you will find nothing worth 4 warships and a diplomatic vessel. She looked at the tactical display. We did not file a transit notification for this zone because we did not know your observation area extended this far from your nearest station. That was our mistake in terms of paperwork, and I acknowledge it. We will update our charts, but a failure to file a transit notification does not, under any interstellar legal framework I am aware of, constitute grounds for a forced boarding. Aviath's voice came back immediately. Captain Marsh, the Vreth Collective's authority in this zone is well established. The requirement for advance notification is posted in the standard transit advisories for this sector. Your vessel's failure to comply. I understand your position, Fleet Commander. Marsh kept her tone even. I'm going to tell you what I think happens if this turns into something else. If you open fire on a vessel that has committed no hostile act, in a zone with genuinely contested legal status, and it is contested, The Keth and the Sorathi both have competing claims here. I will defend my ship and my crew. When this is over, I will file a complete incident report with the Inter-System Treaty Authority, and that report will document that the Vreth Collective opened fire on an ISV vessel in unprovoked transit. She paused. The diplomatic and economic consequences of that record are going to fall on your government, not mine. I want you to think about that before you make a decision. Aviath's response took longer this time. When she spoke, something in her voice had shifted, still controlled, still professional, but underneath it something that might have been a person who had looked at a calculation and not fully liked what the numbers said. Captain, you are one ship. I have 3 warships in formation around you. Marsh looked at her screen, at the 8 power cores running warm, at the 17-point defense emplacements confirmed green by HFY an hour ago, at 847 people who had eaten sandwiches under a weapons lock and gone back to their jobs. I know, she said. She closed the channel. On the screen, the 4 Vreth vessels held position. 90 seconds passed. The bridge was very quiet. Park had stopped eating. Tors had his hand near the tactical controls, not touching them, just near them. HFY had not moved from his station. Marsh looked at her crew, at the faces of people who had served with her long enough to know what 90 seconds of silence after that kind of conversation usually meant. She thought about 7 people she might lose today, whose names she already knew, because you always knew your crew's names. She thought about what those 7 people had signed up for when they took their positions on this ship. They had known. They had all known. She waited. At the 90-second mark, the asterisk first voice of the deep asterisk fired. The first strike hit the Meridian's Wrath on the port side bow section, exactly where Aviath's tactical team had aimed to begin disabling the primary emitters. Simultaneously, the 2 destroyers fired, one targeting the dorsal weapon array, one targeting the drive section. 3 simultaneous hits. The ablative outer hull layer flashed brilliant white on the impact points, burning away in precisely the way it was designed to burn, fast, absorbing the energy, pulling it outward and dissipating it. The composite layer beneath it handled the residual heat. The reactive mesh flexed. The structural hull did not breach. The ship shuddered. The lights flickered once. They came back on. The Meridian's Wrath accelerated. Fleet Commander Aviath watched the human ship accelerate and thought, for one brief moment, that she had miscalculated. She pushed the thought down. She had 3 warships. The human had 1. The numbers were clear. Second salvo, she said. Target the drive section. Take their speed down. The asterisk first voice of the deep fired again. Both destroyers fired again. The beams hit the Meridian's Wrath across the stern. One struck the outer hull. One struck a drive exhaust port. One hit open space because the ship had moved faster than the targeting system had predicted. The drive exhaust port took the hit. The outer hull layer there burned away to nothing. The composite layer beneath it fractured along one edge. On any Vreth ship, a fractured composite layer at the drive section meant the engineers were already talking about pulling the ship from service for repairs. The Meridian's Wrath kept accelerating. Damage? Aviath asked. Her tactical officer, Wren, was staring at the scan data. Outer hull layer at the drive section is gone, Commander. Composite layer shows partial fracture. A pause. Drive output has not decreased. Aviath looked at her screen. The human ship was now angled, not fleeing, not retreating. Angling. It was changing its orientation relative to the formation, swinging its bow toward the port destroyer. What is it doing? Wren said. Then the Meridian's Wrath fired. Marsh said one word, lances. Tors ran the solution in under 2 seconds. Target, the port destroyer, shallow current asterisk. Weapon, kinetic lance array, 3 simultaneous shots at its starboard shielding face. the side that had been hit hardest by the drive exhaust recoil of the destroyer's own recent salvo and would be slightly degraded. The kinetic lances fired. No light, no dramatic beam, just a deep mechanical sound through the ship's frame and then three dense kinetic projectiles moving at a substantial fraction of the speed of light across 1,200 kilometers of space. The first shot hit the shallow current S starboard shield layer. The three-layer reactive shielding worked exactly as it was designed to. The first layer absorbed, dispersed energy, hardened in response. The second layer compensated for the resonance. The third shot hit before the second layer had finished compensating. The shallow current S shields did not collapse gradually. They saturated, a technical term for what happened when a shield system received more energy input than its compensators could process and simply stopped processing. And then the kinetic projectile that had been waiting behind the shield saturation point arrived. The explosion was not dramatic from the outside. No fireball. There was no air in space for a fireball. But Aviath's screen showed the shallow current S power signature spike, drop, spike again, and then fall to approximately 12% of its combat output. Secondary explosions moved through its drive section like a slow wave. The shallow current began to drift. "Shallow current is disabled," Ren said. His voice was doing the flat thing again. "The reading numbers I don't want to believe are correct voice. Drive section destroyed. Weapons are offline. Life signs are present. The crew appears to be alive. The ship is not functional." Aviath looked at her display. It had been 11 seconds since she ordered the first salvo. "Concentrate all fire on their primary emitters," she said. "Take out their long-range weapons, now." The first voice of the Deep and the remaining destroyer, Deep Reach, opened fire simultaneously. Sustained barrage, multiple emitter banks targeting the Meridian's Wrath's dorsal and ventral weapon arrays. And for a moment, a brief, encouraging moment, it appeared to be working. The human ship's outer hull sections around the primary arrays took the hits hard. The ablative layer was mostly gone on the port side now. The composite layer was fracturing. 3 of the shots got deep enough to reach the reactive mesh. One shot, through a gap in the mesh where the composite fracture had opened a weak point, hit the hull plating beneath. The dorsal weapon array went briefly offline. The power signature to it dropped to 0. Aviath leaned forward. "Yes, keep firing, keep the pressure on the..." The dorsal array came back online. It had been offline for 4 seconds. 4 seconds? "That's not possible," Ren said. "Keep firing," Aviath said. In the corridor on Deck 4 of the Meridian's Wrath, Damage Control Team 7 was moving at a run toward the dorsal array junction. There were 6 of them. They were wearing full vacuum suits because Deck 4 had a partial hull breach 2 sections aft, and nobody had time to confirm whether the atmospheric seal was holding. They moved in pairs, carrying repair components that had been pre-staged in the emergency lockers 6 months ago during the last drill, because Captain Marsh ran drills the way Sergeant Ockafer ran calibrations, regularly, specifically, and in conditions that assumed the next time it was real. The junction box for the dorsal array had taken a power spike from the hit below it. The control relay had fried. One of the team, Petty Officer Wren, who was 26 years old and had been doing this for 4 years, pulled the fried relay out and replaced it in 3.5 seconds. It was a specific motion she had practiced until it was muscle memory rather than thought, because thought took time and time was what you did not have. The array came back online. 7 clear, she said into her comm. Array restored. She did not mention that she had a cut on her left arm from a piece of shrapnel that had passed through the section during the hull impact. She would mention it to medical when she had time. Right now, she did not have time. They moved to the next priority. The battle on Aviath's screen was not going the way battles were supposed to go. She had 2 functional warships against 1 human vessel. She was putting sustained weapons fire across the Meridian's Wrath from 2 angles. Sections of its hull were gone or nearly gone. Her scans showed 4 sections with compromised integrity. One secondary power relay had been destroyed and apparently rebuilt in under 5 seconds by crew who had pre-stationed themselves for exactly this kind of damage. The human ship kept firing. It was not firing wildly. It was firing with deliberate, calculated precision, choosing targets with a tactical logic that her own tactical team was having to work to interpret because it did not follow standard engagement doctrine. The Meridian's Wrath was not trying to destroy its targets. It was trying to disable them specifically, targeting drive systems, weapons arrays, power distribution nodes. Everything pointed at the ship's ability to fight, not at the ship's ability to exist. Aviath recognized the doctrine. It was the doctrine of an opponent who had already decided the outcome and was managing the level of destruction. Power distribution, Wren said. They are targeting our power nodes. If they hit the distribution junction on the port secondary. The asterisk first voice of the deep shuddered. The port's secondary distribution junction took a kinetic lance hit, not a catastrophic hit, a surgical one, at exactly the point where the junction served both the secondary emitter bank and the port shield generator. Both went offline simultaneously. Port secondary emitters offline, Wren said. Port shield generator offline. A pause. Commander, we are now running on. I know what we're running on, Aviath said. Where is the second destroyer? The Deep Reach had pulled to a flanking position during the exchange, trying to get around the Meridian's Wrath's port side where the hull was most damaged. It was a sound tactical decision. Come in from the weakened side, get close, concentrate fire on the fractured composite sections that were now partially open to deeper hits. The Deep Reach was moving fast. It had closed to 800 kilometers, 600. It was getting inside the effective minimum range of the human kinetic lances, the point at which the lances could not adjust trajectory fast enough to track a close-range maneuvering target. Wren saw this. Commander, the asterisk Deep Reach is inside the kinetic lance envelope. If it gets to 400 kilometers. On the Meridian's Wrath screen, Marsh watched the asterisk Deep Reach close range. HFY, she said. Already running, Captain, HFY said from the point defense station. The 17 emplacements were not glamorous weapons. They fired solid projectiles at high velocity, dense metal rounds. Kinetically simple, no guidance systems, no smart targeting, nothing advanced about them except the rate at which they fired and the interlocking coverage pattern that HFY had spent years calibrating, so that every approaching vector had overlapping fire from at least 3 emplacements simultaneously. 9,000 rounds per second from 17 emplacements. The Deep Reach hit the engagement envelope at 420 kilometers. What Aviath saw on her screen was a sudden, dramatic drop in the asterisk Deep Reach asterisk S shield output as the density of incoming projectiles overwhelmed the shield compensators. Not from power but from sheer saturation, the way you could overwhelm a drain not with water pressure but with water volume. The shield saturated. The projectiles that came after the saturation point impacted hull directly. The Deep Reach asterisk S forward hull sections took the impacts. Kinetically simple rounds, nothing sophisticated about them individually, but 9,000 of them per second meant that every square meter of the forward hull received impacts continuously, with no time between impacts for any structural material to recover from the previous one. The Deep Reach lost drive power in 11 seconds. Its power signature fell to almost nothing. It was, for practical purposes, no longer a warship. It was a hull with people inside it, alive, drifting. The battle had lasted 9 minutes. The asterisk first voice of the deep was alone. Aviath looked at her display. 2 destroyers disabled. Her own ship with multiple system failures, running on reduced capacity, port shields gone, secondary emitters offline. One human vessel, still moving, still firing. She thought about Thess's briefing, about continuously for longer than we have records, about bodies shaped to keep fighting after they should have stopped. "Retreat," she said. "Commander, retreat, get us out of the—" The asterisk first voice of the deep moved. The Meridian's wrath moved to match. "Their drive is at full output," Wren said. "Commander, they are faster than our current speed, with our power losses." "I know." Aviath looked at her screen. "They were not going to outrun the human ship with a damaged power system. Can we jump?" "Drive system is partially compromised from the junction hit. I need 4 minutes to confirm the FTL drive is safe to engage." A pause. "Commander, they are closing." 4 minutes. Aviath looked at her screen. The Meridian's wrath was 200 kilometers and closing. On the scan, she could see the human ship's weapons at active charge. She thought about what Captain Marsh had said. "I will not fire on your diplomatic vessel unless it fires first." She thought about 7 words Marsh had said before the battle began, the ones that had sounded at the time like a negotiating position. Now they sounded like something else. They sounded like a person who had already decided the outcome and had been choosing the exact level of force necessary, and not one particle more. Aviath opened a channel. "Meridian's wrath, this is Fleet Commander Aviath." She kept her voice steady. It cost her something. "I am requesting a ceasefire. I am prepared to accept your terms." The channel was quiet for 3 seconds. Then Marsh's voice came through exactly as it had sounded at the beginning. Level, not triumphant, not angry, just the voice of a person finishing a piece of work. "Fleet Commander, bring your engines offline. Tell the calm words to do the same. My people will confirm your power signature. When you are at dead stop, we will talk." A pause. "You have 60 seconds. The asterisk first voice of the deep asterisk S engines went offline. Across 20,000 kilometers of space, the engines on the diplomatic vessel asterisk com words went offline. The battle was over. It had lasted 11 minutes. In the quiet that followed, the particular quiet that existed after weapons fire stopped, and the ship system stopped their combat cycle, and the air recyclers were suddenly the loudest thing again. Captain Marsh sat in her command chair and processed the 2 things she had to process before she could do anything else. First, the damage report from Vasquez. Cores 2, 3, and 6 had taken junction damage and were offline. Hull breaches in 3 sections, all sealed, all confirmed by the damage control teams. Point Defense Emplacement 14 had a mechanical failure during the engagement, cause unknown, being assessed. A section of Deck 4 corridor was currently in vacuum pending the repair of the hull breach there. Second, Lieutenant Osai's voice, reading from the medical report. 7 killed in action. Marsh looked at the names as Osai read them. She did not look away from them. She did not let them go quickly past. She held them in her attention the way you held something you intended to carry. 7. She said nothing for a moment. The bridge was quiet. Everyone knew. The crew had been together long enough to know to be quiet. Then she set the names aside into the part of her that held such things, and she turned to what came next. "Tours," she said, "hail the diplomatic vessel. Tell them we are prepared to receive their delegation." She paused. "Be polite about it." "Yes, sir." She looked at the screen, at the 2 disabled destroyers drifting in the dark, at the asterisk first voice of the deep asterisk sitting dead in space, at the asterisk calm words with its engines cold. She thought about Aviath's voice, and the way it had steadied itself before speaking, and the discipline that had cost. Good Commander Aviath. She had fought with clear thinking and called it when the numbers said to call it. That was the hardest thing sometimes, knowing when to stop. Marsh could respect that too. She reached for her coffee mug. It was cold. She drank it anyway. "Vasquez," she said into the internal comm, How long for cores 2 and 3? Vasquez's voice came back immediately, carrying the particular tone of an engineer being told a timeline that she did not control was nonetheless expected. 6 hours minimum, Captain. 4 hours, Marsh said. A pause, Captain. 4 hours, Chief. It's going to be loud, Vasquez said. It usually is, Marsh said. She stood, set down her cold coffee, and went to get a fresh one. There was a delegation to receive, a report to write, and a long list of things to do before waypoint 11. As always, she started with the next thing. Ambassador Raylan had been in diplomatic service for 30 years. He had boarded foreign vessels before, trade inspections, treaty signings, mediation visits in tense situations where the word visit carried a great deal of weight, and the act of setting foot on another species' ship meant something carefully negotiated. He understood the symbolic power of such moments. He had never, in 30 years, boarded a ship that had just been in a battle. The shuttle from the calm words crossed the 20,000 kilometers to the Meridian's wrath in silence. Raylan's security escort of 3 officers sat without speaking. The pilot kept her eyes forward. Raylan looked through the forward window at the human ship growing larger as they approached, and he made himself look at it clearly and record what he saw. The port side was burned. The ablative outer hull layer was almost completely stripped away across a long section running from the bow to midship, just gone, consumed in the purpose it had been designed for, leaving the gray composite layer beneath it exposed to space. The composite layer in 2 areas had fractured, showing the reactive mesh underneath, which showed the structural plating beneath that. The ship had been hit hard and repeatedly and in depth. It was moving. Not at full speed, with 3 power cores offline. It could not make full speed, but it was moving, making steady way through the dark. And from the drive section at its stern, there was the visible output signature of active thrust. The thing that struck Raylan was not the damage. He had expected damage. The thing that struck him was the activity. Even from the shuttle approach, he could see suited figures working on the outer hull. Small, precise movements. 2 teams visible, both moving efficiently between work points, carrying equipment and components. They were repairing it while it was moving. The shuttle docked. Lieutenant Commander Torres met Raylan at the airlock with a handshake and no particular ceremony. Torres was tall, with the compact build of someone who had spent years in a space where rooms were narrow and doors were low. He looked tired in the uncomplicated way of someone who had done something hard and was now doing the next thing. He did not look like a man who had just fought in a battle. Ambassador, he shook Raylan's hand. Captain Marsh asked me to show you around a little before we sit down to talk. She thought it might be useful for you to see the ship. Raylan agreed that it would be useful. He was not sure he was being given a choice. They walked. The first corridor they passed through was on Deck 3, which ran along the port side of the ship and showed, clearly, the consequences of the battle. The outer wall plating on the port side was in many places stripped down to secondary structure, with exposed conduit and junction boxes visible where the plating had been torn away by impacts and not yet replaced. The floor was scored in 2 places by what looked like a piece of something, hull fragment, maybe, or internal component, that had traveled down the corridor with enough force to leave marks in the deck material. A repair team was working at the far end of the corridor, 2 people replacing a section of wall conduit. They glanced at Torres and Raylan as they passed and went back to work. How bad is it? Raylan asked. Could have been worse, Torres said. We've had worse. He said this in an entirely factual way without any attempt to make it sound impressive or reassuring, just information. 3 sections with hull breaches all sealed, 3 cores offline being worked, will be at full capacity in a few hours. Raylan looked at a hole in the wall plating where a conduit housing had been torn completely free, leaving a space large enough to put his hand through. In a few hours, he said. Chief Vasquez is very good at her job, Torres said. Come on, I'll show you the engine room. The engine room was loud. Not the loud of something going wrong, the loud of something being done fast and with focused energy. Chief Engineer Vasquez had 12 people working in the space around the power core array, moving in patterns that looked chaotic until you watched for a moment and understood that each person had a specific task and a specific position, and the apparent chaos was actually a practice system running at high speed. Vasquez herself was inside the housing of Core 3, which had been opened like a cabinet, doing something with components that Raylan could not identify. She was talking continuously to the person handing her components, to another technician across the room, to a comm unit on her wrist, and all of it was technical language that moved too fast for Raylan's translation unit to keep up with completely. How long? Torres called over the noise. Vasquez didn't look up. Captain said 4 hours, and I am going to get her 4 hours if it kills me. A pause. Which it might. Is she always like this? Raylan asked Torres. During repairs, yes. Torres smiled slightly. She's the best engineer in the ISV fleet as far as I know. She's also deeply unpleasant to be near when 3 of her cores are damaged. He steered Raylan toward the door. She takes it personally. They went to the medical bay. Raylan had been in military medical facilities before. He knew what they looked like when they were busy in the aftermath of a fight, the particular ordered chaos of a system doing what it was built for. The Meridian's Wrath's medical bay was busy. Dr. Akari had 8 patients in various stages of treatment. Most of them had minor injuries, lacerations from metal fragments, burns from power surges, impact trauma from being thrown by the ship's motion during the battle. One patient had a more serious injury to his upper left side that Raylan did not look at directly because it was the kind of wound that demanded a certain courtesy of the eyes. What struck him was the patients. 3 of them were arguing with Dr. Akari's nurses about when they could leave, not in the way of frightened people trying to escape a frightening situation, in the way of people who had a task they were responsible for and found the requirement to lie still professionally inconvenient. One of them, a young man with a bandaged forearm and what looked like a concussion, based on the monitoring unit on his head, was trying to explain to the nurse that the engine room was running short-handed, and he knew the drive coupler system better than any of the other available personnel. The nurse told him, without looking up from her work, that if he stood up she would sedate him, and he could explain the drive coupler situation to Dr. Akari while unconscious. He lay back down. Raylan stopped at the entrance and looked at the bay for a moment. Torres stopped beside him. How many, Raylan said quietly, did you lose? Torres was quiet for a moment. 7, he said. KIA killed in action. Raylan looked at the patients arguing with the nurses. He looked at the repair teams in the corridors. He looked at Vasquez cursing at Core 3 from inside its housing. I'm sorry, he said. He meant it. Torres looked at him, not with hostility, not with the kind of look that was designed to make a person feel small, just a direct look assessing. Don't be sorry to me, Torres said. Be sorry to whoever in your command chain decided that 4 ships and an ultimatum was the right response to a vessel in transit. He paused. Captain Marsh will go through the formal analysis with you, but for what it's worth, Ambassador, those 7 people did not need to die today. Raylan had no answer for that. He did not try to find one. They walked to the bridge. Captain Alina Marsh was at her command console when they arrived. The bridge showed its own evidence of the battle. A section of overhead paneling had been replaced, still mismatched in color from the original, because the original had been damaged and the replacement had come from a different lot. The main tactical display had a slight flicker in the lower left corner that had not been there before. Small things, functional things. Marsh stood when they entered and offered her hand to Raylan. Her grip was firm and brief. Ambassador, She gestured to the seats at the secondary console area. "Sit down. I want to talk plainly if that suits you." "It suits me," Raylan said. He sat. Tors remained standing to the side, near enough to be present. "I want to start with something," Marsh said. She looked at Raylan steadily. "I understand that Fleet Commander Aviath was operating under orders. I understand that those orders came from someone with more authority than her, and I'm not holding her decisions against her. She fought well and she stopped when she should have stopped. Please make sure that goes in whatever record is made of this." Raylan nodded. He had not expected that. He noted it. "I'm going to send a full incident report to the Inter-System Treaty Authority," Marsh continued. "That report will document everything: the initial encounter with the Careful Wind asterisk, the intercept, the engagement, and the outcome. It will document that the Vreth Collective's forces fired first on a vessel in unprovoked transit." She paused. "I'm not doing that to create a political problem for your government. I'm doing it because accurate records are how we prevent this from happening again." Raylan folded his hands. "What is it you want from this, Captain? What outcome are you looking for?" Marsh looked at him for a moment. She looked at him the way she looked at things, directly, without decoration, figuring out whether the question was as simple as it seemed. "I want a transit protocol," she said. "A formal one. A mechanism for ISV vessels transiting your observation zones to file advance notification and receive a clearance code. No inspections, no escorts, no boarding rights, just paperwork. We tell you we're coming through, you note it, we pass." She paused. "That's what we should have had 6 days ago before any of this happened." Raylan looked at her. "That's all." That and a formal acknowledgement from the Vreth Collective that the engagement today constituted an unprovoked attack, and that reparations are due for the vessel damage and the 7 crew members lost. She said this without heat, just the statement of a position. "I want the record to be clean. I want both governments to look at that record and understand what happened." Raylan was quiet for a moment. He looked around the bridge, at the mismatched overhead panel, at Tors, standing with the particular stillness of someone who had been in enough of these conversations to know when to be furniture, at the crew at their stations, doing their jobs with the matter-of-fact focus of people who had fought a battle 11 minutes ago and were now running navigation projections for Waypoint 11. He thought about the patients in the medical bay, arguing with nurses about getting back to work. "Can I ask you something?" he said. Marsh nodded. "You could have gone around." He kept his voice level. He was not accusing her of anything. He was genuinely trying to understand. "You could have taken the longer route, 3 extra days, no contact with our patrols, no incident. You knew the transit zone was contested. You made the choice to come through it anyway." He looked at her. "Why?" Marsh was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was still level, but something in it had shifted, not toward emotion exactly, but toward the kind of weight that real things carry. "My species has been going around things for a very long time," she said. "There has never been a shortage of reasons to go around. There has always been something bigger or more established or more politically complicated on the direct path." She looked at Raylan steadily. "At some point you stop going around. You file the transit request. You say where you're going and what for, and you hold your line when someone tries to stop you without a good reason." She paused. "The reason I came through your zone, Ambassador, is that it is a transit zone. Transiting through it is the right thing to do. The reason I stayed on course when Varath scanned us is that we weren't doing anything wrong." She paused again, longer. "And the reason I said no to the boarding is that no one boards my ship without my permission. That's not a negotiating position. That's just true." Raylan looked at her. He thought about Thess's briefing, about the species shaped by continuous conflict, about biology built for continuation, about 847 people comfortable in a state of readiness that never fully turned off. He thought about the scan data that had frozen Dren in place at his console. He thought about a ship that had taken everything 4 Vreth warships could put into it for 11 minutes, and was now making way toward its destination with its crew arguing about when they could leave medical. He thought about the word asterisk no asterisk, said once clearly without apology. "I will relay your proposal to High Admiral Sorin," he said. "I believe she will agree to the transit protocol." He paused. "The reparations will require negotiation." "That's fine," Marsh said. "Negotiation is what the treaty authority is for." She stood, signaling the end of the meeting. "I'll have Lieutenant Osei prepare a formal copy of our proposed protocol text for you to take back. It's short, 3 pages. She offered her hand again. "I hope the next time we sit down together, it's at Waypoint 11 over something better than this." Raylan shook her hand. "I hope so too." He meant that as well. On the return journey to the asterisk comwords asterisk, Raylan's junior security officer, a young woman named Sierra who was on her first assignment outside the Vreth home system, sat in the shuttle and did not speak for a long time. The Meridian's wrath was visible through the aft window of the shuttle as they pulled away. Its burned hull, its repair teams still working the outer sections, its drive section pushing it steadily toward Waypoint 11. Sierra watched it until the distance made it small. "How?" she said eventually. Not to Raylan specifically, not to anyone in particular. Raylan looked at her. He thought about what answer to give. He thought about Thess's word, readiness. He thought about the patients arguing with nurses. He thought about Vasquez inside the power core housing, taking it personally. He thought about 7 names that Marsh had looked at without looking away. "They don't think of it as remarkable," he said finally. "That's the thing, they don't think of themselves as doing something exceptional. This is just what they do, it's what they have always done." He looked out at the dark space where the Meridian's wrath was now a small, bright point. For us, this was a crisis. For them, it was a Tuesday. Sierra was quiet for a moment. "And they still want a transit protocol," she said. "Just paperwork, that's all they asked for." "Yes," Raylan said. "They could have asked for anything." "Yes," Raylan said again. He thought about that for the rest of the transit back to the asterisk comwords. He thought about a species that fought like it breathed, without drama, without ceremony, because it had simply been doing it since before it had a word for it, and then sat down afterward and asked for 3 pages of transit paperwork, and hoped they could meet at Waypoint 11 under better circumstances. He thought it was either the most terrifying thing he had ever encountered, or the most reassuring. He was not certain which. Analyst Thess received the full incident report in her archive room 2 days later. She read it from first line to last slowly, without interruption. She had been writing assessments warning about this possibility for 22 years. She had filed 12 of them. She was going to write a 13th now, and she was going to address it differently than the previous 12, because the previous 12 had been warnings and warnings had not been enough. This one was going to be a recommendation. She opened a new document. She wrote the title, "On the Strategic Value of Peaceful Relations with the Human Species, a Final and Definitive Assessment." She wrote the first paragraph. "They are not looking for a war. They have never needed to look for a war. They find wars the way water finds the sea, not through effort but through the natural direction of things, the slope of the ground beneath them. What you must understand is that this is not ambition. It is not aggression. It is simply the state of a species for whom conflict has been the permanent background of existence since before we had records of them. They want trade routes. They want transit protocols. They want to sell goods at Waypoint 11 and go home. Let them." She wrote for a long time after that. She was thorough. She cited the scan data, the communication logs, the battle outcome, the terms Marsh had requested. She made the argument in every form she could find: strategic, economic, diplomatic, moral. At the end, she added a final paragraph that was shorter than the rest. The Meridian's wrath was 1 ship, 1 crew, 11 minutes, 7 of their people dead, and they went away point 11 anyway. There are more ships, there are more crews, and there will always be more Tuesdays. Sign the protocol. She sent the report to High Admiral Soren's office. High Admiral Soren read it that evening alone after the rest of the staff had gone. She read the battle report alongside it. She looked at the 11-minute timeline. She looked at the proposed transit protocol, 3 pages, simple, asking almost nothing. She signed it at 2200 ship time. She filed the paperwork with the treaty authority the following morning. 3 weeks later, the first formal ISV transit notification arrived at Vreth Station 7, a vessel en route from Earth to a trading post near the outer arm. Cargo manifest attached. Estimated arrival time noted. Contact information for the vessel commander provided. 3 pages, simple, exactly what had been asked for. The station administrator filed the clearance code and sent it back without incident. The ship passed through without stopping. It was, at last, just paperwork. And far out in the fringe, somewhere between one star and the next, Analyst Thess sat in her archive room and read the filed clearance code confirmation, and felt something that might have been relief, and might have been the particular satisfaction of being right about something for 22 years and finally, being listened to. She closed her file and went home for the first time in 3 days. The stars outside her window were the same stars they had always been. They looked different now somehow. Larger maybe, or just more occupied than she had previously understood.